the links to check out the various other Odyssey, Bit Chute, or subscribe. And I think I just joined Locals too. I think it's just Bianca at Locals. So this is by John Della Rose. Now this brings in a bunch of other issues. Our favorite Mark Waid, who's I don't think he's playing with the full deck. I think he's trying to explain a failing comic industry by talking about artists who have not kept up with the times, which in my not being an artistic expert, looking at art that doesn't seem accurate to me. Artists stay fresh. It's like, well, they stay fresh for the art that they're doing, but artists retain talent for a long time unless they come down with some kind of sickness. You can be an artist for a very long time, but I think Mark Waid is like trying to explain a failing comic industry by saying that artists from the 90s are not keeping pace. But as I'll point out below, the other side of the equation is that they're shipping these art jobs to the Philippines, and that brings in a bigger issue of globalism and ultimately civil war. Believe it or not, it's all tied in. But as he says, the central two small paragraphs are relevant. So he's talking about the industry. There's going to be ageism, yeah, for sure, but it's also like he's not going to talk about politics and the insane left-wing bias, and because he's nuts. He's left-wing. He's nuts. He's a just insane globalist who thinks just some guy is a European supreme type of person, and Myers, who's got kids from all over the world, is also a European supreme person. Just some guy's a black guy, but he's a suspected European supreme, but he's a black guy. In case you couldn't tell from his voice, maybe he doesn't listen to the channel. I mean, but it shows you like this guy's an idiot. He's throwing out these very serious accusations based on nothing. It's like, this is how oh, he must be Hugo Boss marching around in a little mustache. Yeah, you guys call literally everybody that. It's like the most insane things to like. Do words have meaning to these people? Well, no, I guess technically they don't, because they don't know what a woman is, and that's not me being a shitlord. I mean, they literally can't define it. You ask a Supreme Court justice and she didn't know what a woman was. That should be terrifying. Yeah, absolutely terrifying. So he's talking about ageism, but he's not going to talk about political bias. And then all the other people in, John Malin, EBS, Mike Miller, all these kind of people who are absolutely discriminated against. It's like for them to be in mainstream comics would be a hostile work environment. You just couldn't do it because like the people they're working with are adults with childlike mentality. It's kind of that there's a lot of people there who are in this far left echo chamber where they think anyone who is not absolute in lockstep accord with them is some kind of, like, it's okay to dehumanize people who are across the aisle from you. Like, that never happened even a decade ago. It's like people were like adults acted like adults a decade ago, and I don't know what happened nowadays. They just got, it's like the participation trophy generation is kind of coming into their own. That's a lot of that is what it feels like people who immediately resort to ad hominem straw mans and deflections because they don't want to address the argument, because in my opinion a lot of left-wing arguments they don't withstand this the harsh sunlight of that open marketplace, and they haven't been used, especially now with social media and you can create your own echo chamber. You're not used to confronting an opposing opinion. And back in the old days, it was, if you didn't know your opponent's argument, you didn't know your own, and people would engage in this dialogue back and forth to learn your weaknesses, to sharpen your own argument, and maybe even to change your mind on something. That was a whole, like, things have changed so radically, and a lot of it is like, oh, because of Trump and the 2015, 2016 type of stuff. He didn't cause this. I think he was just along for the ride. Like, all this was kind of happening anyway. So he's talking about ageism, but not about politics, which is like, if you follow comics on Twitter, everyone who has a public social media footprint in comics is very far left wing, and there's nobody who's openly far right wing. They're simply not allowed. So he's talking about, artists not being able to consistently hit homers forever. The creators are most punished by this, seems the ones whose style, even though they're great in the past, it's like, what an F you to all the artists you work with, have become so locked and predictable that it doesn't seem as fresh and attractive to readers and editors as it once did. what a weird thing for this guy to say. He's a writer in comics, to talk about his people he works with, people he's worked with in the past. This is like, to say this and to not understand it is some kind of borderline personality disorder. So Liefeld calls him the bitter source. Mark Waid is extremely bitter, and he's just not playing with a full deck. So it's kind of hard to hate him. He did an interview with Word Balloon like last year or 2 years ago, and I remember this. He's talking to this guy, and this is in the middle of the gift from overseas, and he's talking about being afraid to leave his house. Like, so I mean, different people responded to this this thing differently. This like, I didn't give two shits about it, if I'm being honest. I mean, the first month I did like wash my hands and do all that kind of stuff. But after that, I'm like, I just don't care anymore. But he's one of those guys who's like, he's 50, giving this interview. He goes, like, I was afraid to leave my house. I'm like, dude, that's a different mindset. Anyway, so he really doesn't understand what he just said. It's like, I mean, he's not playing with a full deck, because he's calling everyone. He's got this kind of persecution complex where everyone is in Hugo Boss and everyone is out to get him. Like, he doesn't understand that what he just said defamed all the artists he's worked with over the decades, who are out of the industry now. And it's like, he says, yes, there's ageism, but then the ageism isn't why you're out of the industry. It's not ageism. It's your talent hasn't kept pace. And that's not been my experience looking at art over the years. Art seems to maintain itself pretty well, unless you get sick or something. And he's never going to talk about politics. In fact, a little bit later he does below. But when Liefeld calls him out, like, he doesn't understand. He said, we should talk about this private. It's like, he really, he only got 11 responses for that. He really doesn't understand what he's done. And his argument is cut in half because they're not in the industry now. Because one, the industry is not doing too well because of the far left-wing writers and the editors who have pushed this far left-wing narrative that destroyed the industry, not the artist. To blame the artist is nuts. And the second part is like, well, if you ship the artist jobs over to the Philippines, where they pay them a third of what the American salary would be, how is an American artist supposed to keep up with that? Because they have to live in America and pay American costs. That doesn't quite make sense. It's like, why don't you just use American artists, pay them? It's like, well, the mainstream comic industry doesn't want to do that and can't do that because the stuff isn't selling. They have to cut costs as much as possible. So then he touches, like, the mainstream comic industry is extreme hate-filled, bigoted, anti-white, misandrist, anti-Christian. It's just a collection of globalist weirdos, and it's extremely left-wing biased. And so he addresses that by saying, talking about people, like, very mild people, like, if you think EVS or Mike Miller or some far-right types, or Malin or all the other guys who are now on Comicsgate, those guys aren't far right by any metric. They're vaguely, I think, Trump supporters, and some are Christians, and that's it. But when you're this far left in in an echo chamber, as you can see, you can go to Twitter and follow these, Gail Simone's and Mark Waid's and all these other people. They're so far left, and the idea of a diversity of thought terrifies them. Because honestly, like, they legitimately don't have the better argument, and the company should have been, DC and Marvel, whoever else, should have had the balls to say, yeah, we respect diversity of thought and just stand by that. But it's like, they don't. I mean, you see so many companies will immediately bend over. It's like, this is just the new way of the world. It's like, even when it results in lower sales, as if you read mainstream comics, they suck. They're horrible. As is a lot of mainstream, hey, Rings of Power and Game of Thrones and She-Hulk and Star Wars Andor. It's like, oh, those are all horrible. Yes, they are. Yes, they are horrible, as is mainstream comics. So he says, he's saying that if you're blacklisted by this industry that is extremely far left and against anyone who's of European origin or Christian or male, I promise you that as long as you're not publicly Istophobic or hateful or dishonest or a poster child for Me Too, as long as you're not actively toxic and unprofessional, regardless of your political affiliation, no, that's horseshit. If you were, American flag during the Trump years, American flag, MAGA, Christian, a right-wing person publicly on social media and you're in the industry, you wouldn't be in the industry for long. This is horseshit. They consider anyone who's not a leftist to be toxic. If you're, anti whatever the left-wing talking points are, closed border, if you're closed borders, anti-abortion, you want harsh sentencing guidelines, you want clean, safe neighborhoods, you want criminals put in prison, you want all that kind of stuff. Oh, that's a toxic individual. Yeah, we want like no Soros involvement in selecting funding district attorneys' offices. Oh, that's a toxic individual. You're not allowed in the industry. Yeah, I mean, it's like, yes. And as a consequence, look at mainstream comics. What are the exact sales numbers? I don't need to know the exact numbers, no matter what some people say. It's because you can look at the product itself it's absolute. It's just left wing cliche after cliche. Mark Waid and Kwanzaa did a comic. I forget what it's called. Ignited, I think. It went for like a dozen issues, set in Arizona. In case you don't know where Arizona is, basically northern Mexico now. Which I know if they hear that, they think for some reason they take everything as offensive. But in the comic, I think it's a Second Amendment comic, anti-Second Amendment comic, of course. All the bad parents are like blonde hair, blue eyed, or red haired, green eyed in Arizona in current year, and they're all like, pro Second Amendment, as well they should be. And so how well did that comic do? I think it went for 10 issues, and just nobody was buying it. Nobody read it, even from the start. I think the first issue was just absolute. I think he even fired Kwanzaa. It was helping him write it. It was horrible. It's horrible. I mean, it's like, this is the mind of the left wing, where they've got no oversight whatsoever. Where, I don't know, maybe back in the day when you had the original people in the industry, they still wanted to sell comics, but now it's like this is just an echo chamber for them. And the old stuff, I guess, still brings in some sort of residual money, IP money like that. But the new stuff now, I mean, you can go read it for yourself. Tell me I'm lying. Anyway, so he's trying to blame the artists for a failing industry, is what it feels like, while simultaneously not covering the insane discrimination against anyone who's vaguely not on board the left-wing plantation, and also not discussing the fact that they're shipping jobs over to the Philippines. It's like, your argument doesn't make sense, but if it makes you feel better to rant and rave on Facebook and you get 11 likes, well, I mean, like I said, the dude's nuts. Anyway, like, comment, subscribe. See you next episode.